Hi, I'm Bruce Eckel,
And I'm James Ward.
and this is First Steps in Flex, and we're going to look at forms. And I have to admit, one of the things I have a lot of trouble with is just HTML in general, and having to write things and worry about what browsers they're working on and whether it supports this or that, and also always having to go back to the server to validate things. And so it would be awfully nice if we could just do that in Flex and not have to worry about cross-platform issues.
Absolutely. And data entry is certainly a fundamental part of any application development.
And I know that people have been doing more and more of that in Ajax, and it seems like it's better, but it never seems to quite work right across browsers or on the browser that I'm working with.
Right.
So personally, I don't want to have to solve that problem. I just want to write the code and
Yep.
have it work and not worry about testing it everywhere.
Yep, absolutely. So let's dive in and actually create a project here just to show you how a form works. So we'll call this one forms. So in this project, we're going to do a very simple form here. Let me get rid of that layout absolute. And what we're going to say is form. So we have a component in Flex called form, which needs to be mx colon form. There we go. And so inside of our form, what we're going to say is I want a form item. And what a form item is it's a container that will have a label on the left and then the form control that you want on the right. So let's set that label to full name. And now inside of our form item, we're going to have a text input. So text input is just the basic control for entering text into a form. There's also text area, there's checkboxes and combo boxes and all sorts of data entry controls. We're just not going to go through this today, but did want to show you the basics. So here's our text input, and we'll give it an ID. We'll call this full name. And then we're going to put some other properties on this in a minute. We'll add those in later. And now below our form, let's have a button. Give this an ID. We'll call it submit button. And label submit. And then we're going to default this to enabled false. So we don't want that submit button to be enabled unless the user has entered something correct into that full name text input.
And ordinarily, when you click this button, it would do something over the internet, right?
Yeah. In this case, we don't have a click handler on the button to actually do anything over the internet, but certainly in a real application, we would wire this button up so that it would send the information, the validated information, up to the server or store it in a database, whatever.
So within the form itself, can I put things like horizontal layout boxes and vertical layout boxes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so form is a container and form item is a container. Form item, all that it really does is align multiple form items so that there's a consistent width to the label so that everything lines up correctly.
So I don't have to use like tables to do that.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now back in our text input, let's add a few properties here to the text input. So what we're going to say is that when this text input is valid, what we're going to do is we're going to call the submit button, say you are enabled equals true. And then we're also going to say when the submit button, when the text input is invalid, what we will do is call submit button dot enabled equals false.
And we could run it right now, yeah.
We could. Yep. Let's give that a try. So in this case, we haven't hooked up our validator yet, which is what we'll do next. But we'll see that the submit button is disabled right now. We can't click that. And so let's enter some information into there. And you'll see that the submit button is still not enabled. And that's because we haven't hooked up the validator to tell it when the data in this text input is valid or invalid.
Basically, we need some code to switch the state.
Exactly. So let's add that. So to do that, what we're going to have is, in this case, we're going to use the Regex Validator. And so the regex validator is just one of the many validators in Flex. There are credit card number validators and currency validators and date validators. So all sorts of different validators and just out of the box in Flex, or you can extend the base validator classes and write your own. So we're going to use the regex validator,
which is a very general purpose thing because you could set it up to match any pattern that you're interested in.
Exactly. So now here, let's give our regex validator an ID. We'll call it regexb. And now let's set some properties on this regex validator. What we're going to do is we're going to say the source. So the source of this needs to point to the form element, or the control that's actually going to hold the thing that we're validating. So we're going to use data binding. We're going to say bind to full name. So that full name text input will be our source.
So basically this is a separate object and you've just told it to watch full name, and so it's almost like it's running in parallel.
Yep. Yeah.
And every time full name changes, it's going to run the validator and see if it's changed anything.
Exactly. And so we'll actually specify all of that information here in a second. So what we're going to say is that the property that we're going to watch actually is text. So text input has a property on it called text, and that's the actual property that we want to do the validation on.
The data inside of that text input.
Exactly. So then we're going to say our regex expression. So here's where we do our regex. We're going to say that full name needs to be a word, then needs to be some white space. So it can be any length of white space, has to be at least one character of white space, and then another word. Okay, so word, there we go.
So,
it can be any
so
number of words.
/W means any character, and the plus means one or more times.
Right. So we're saying one or more character, one or more space, one or more character is a full name. Okay, and then we need to define a few more things on this regex validator. What we're going to say is that the trigger, so trigger is the component that it will trigger the validation to happen. So again, that's just full name. So
and this means, when you put it in there, it means if full name changes.
Yeah, so what the next property, you'll see where this makes sense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the trigger event. So I'm going to say when full name, when this object throws this change event, then run the regex validator. And what it's actually going to, where it's going to get the property that it's validating is from sources, which is full name's text property. So we just have to map these sorts of things in. There's some different ways.
You're able to give a fair amount of detail about exactly when this validator fires.
We could do it on a number of different events. Change gets thrown every time a character is entered. We could do it on the like when the focus leaves the text input. So there's lots of different events that we could trigger this on.
So what happens if something goes wrong? What does it do?
So we need to let the user know when they've failed the validation. So in order to do that, we're going to set a property here on the validator. We're going to say no match error, and then we're just going to put in the text to display, which is going to be no, or must consist of at least 2 names. And that's it. So that will display to the user when they don't meet that regex validator. And that will display as kind of a tooltip or a validation error on the form. So that's going to be built into the form control, is the ability to display these errors. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening just under the covers to set up these validators and display errors, and we can get much more granular with how we define these things, and with multiple fields in a form, how we do multiple field validation, and how we do server validation. So there's a lot more that we can do, but that's beyond the scope here. So let's go reload this, and let's close that one. And now let's see it working. So as soon as I start typing, when I hit the first key, what it did was it did that change event on the text input, which triggered the validator, and now it's showing us the validation message and saying that, and it disappears. You can customize how long that stays up. But let's see, come back. There it is. It just takes a second. So that message, you can configure how that shows up. I think we have to leave and come back. There we go. So, so we need to put in two names. So let's do that. And as soon as we match the regex expression, then you'll see that our submit button is now enabled because our valid, this validative event was triggered on the text input, which enabled the button.
Okay, so humor me here. Put in 3 names.
So 3 names is still okay. We could have restricted in the regex to not allow that, but in this case, it's letting us do beyond the 2 names. But the other interesting thing here is that if I then do something that invalidates this, it then calls the invalidate method, and throws this invalidate event, which then sets the submit button to false, which is why we now get that disabled. So if we meet it again, there we go. The validation goes away. The red box should have gone away as well. Not sure why that didn't, but maybe I need to click on the submit button. But yeah, so that's basics of form validation and form data entry in Flex.
So now there's a bunch of I mean, we happen to be using the regex validator, but there's a bunch of others, right?
Yep, there are a number of others in the Flex framework that
some
you can
of them
use.
are surprisingly specific, like Social Security validator and credit card validator and everything. And then if there isn't a validator to do what you want, presumably you can write your own.
Exactly, you can just extend the base validator classes. So another thing here is that a lot of people notice that, hey, we're putting these strings directly into this application. You really should, in an application that needs to work in more than just one language, use resource bundles and externalize those strings. And there's some information in a later chapter about how to do that. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be hard-coded error messages into this application. Great. That's forms.